What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Enotria, not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but I'm sure someone will tell me. In any event though, this particular game happens to be an upcoming Souls-like set to launch in September. However, just yesterday, from the time of this particular video, they put out a demo over on Steam, and it is public, so you can go check it out for yourself if you'd like. But I figured I'd take a look at that demo and talk a little bit about this game because I have been interested in it since I first saw its relatively recent announcement, because while this is a Souls-like, which have gotten, I would say, a bit saturated in the market lately, this one is focusing on Italian folklore, or that's at least what it is inspired by, which is a pretty unique setting, I would say, which is enough to capture my own interest. Though I will say right away here that the demo definitely suffers from some of that very common Unreal Engine stuttering shader compilation stuff, which is hopefully an area they will focus on a great deal, or at least do a little preloading for the shaders to sort that out before the actual launch of the game come September, because that was the main issue I ran into here. But let's talk about what this game is actually about. So in this particular title, we will be playing as the maskless one, or a sort of wooden mannequin almost, that just so happens to be trapped in an eternal play of sorts where everyone has a role but you. And your lack of a role in this play that has turned the world to a complete stasis is going to allow you to take the fight to the people who made it, and of course attempt to stop them, which involves moving around a land heavily inspired by Italy's own vistas, mixed with a little grim fantasy. Now, outside of that setting, I think the game does one or two interesting things in terms of its mechanics, but largely functions as a very traditional Souls-like in that we're going to be killing enemies, picking up what this game calls memoria, or our experience, spending that on things like upgrading our character, and our weapons, etc. So let's focus on the more unique stuff. One thing that you'll be accumulating as you fight enemies and take on challenges is earning inspiration points. This allows you to unlock nodes in the Path of the Innovator system, which acts as a sort of passive ability tree that you can access from your rest points. These are going to, of course, help customize your build, which I thought was pretty neat. But the exact impact, of course, is yet to be seen, as you couldn't unlock all of these in the demo. And another thing you can do at the rest points is properly set up your character. So this game is going to allow you to have 3 loadouts that you can switch between in between the various rest points, because outside of these resting points, you won't be able to change much beyond just what weapon you happen to be carrying. This means that things like the mask you are wearing, which determines your sort of armor setup, if you will, as well as your abilities that you have equipped that you can use actively, can't be changed while you're just running about. You have to go back to a rest point, but you can sort of hot swap between 3 preset layouts to sort of adjust and account for anything you might run into. But let's talk a little bit about that equipment system. So our character here, being the maskless one, is going to put on masks, which will apparently number over 30, and these are going to fundamentally alter the playstyle in some ways, so each will have strengths and weaknesses, and also they'll be changing how your character looks a bit. Another important aspect of these masks, though, is that they're going to give you access to these sort of perk slots, which is where you're going to be slotting the passive abilities that you'll be picking up from the Path of the Innovator tree, which then goes back to swapping out your loadouts on the fly, which seems to be an interesting enough setup for the sake of a demo, and I'd be curious to see how that evolves over the course of the full game. Now, before we talk about the main draw, combat, another thing I want to mention is that the game plays around with altering reality in a way that allows you to interact with the environment and thus solve sort of interesting puzzles, let's say. So you'll find these rifts out in the world that you can interact with, which then alter the world for a limited amount of time generally, typically spawning things that you can jump or climb over, so you can access new areas and explore some of the level design a bit, which I think is an important aspect in these more interconnected world systems that we often see in Souls-likes. But let's talk about the big thing, the combat itself. Now, the Steam page says that this game is going to have 120 plus weapons, 8 different classes of weapons, something like 45 spells and a bunch of parry modifiers, because I want to mention right away here that the parry in particular feels a little more like a block, at least in terms of its base version. So the fact that they specifically mention that there are 8 different modifiers to that parry makes me wonder what all they've done with it that will make it feel more satisfying to use, But that's far from the only thing to know. And while yes, combat, of course, as I'm sure you've seen on screen, and will be unsurprised to learn, follows that basic Souls-like formula of heavy stamina costs, having to learn enemy patterns, sort of dive in and out, counter their combos, etc. Another big portion of it are your lines, as they're called, or your active abilities, which you can charge up and use in combat. As you hit enemies, your lines will charge, and those are also part of that loadout system that I mentioned. So theoretically, you could on the fly swap between very different loadouts, encompassing different line abilities on top of different masks and perks, customizing your approach to, say, a few different enemy types you may or may not be about to run into, which I think has the potential to be an interesting system. And that's the main thing to know in terms of unique, or at least especially noteworthy, portions of this combat, because I would say the rest of it is pretty standard Souls-like fare. Things like hitting enemies, breaking their posture over time, opening them up for a massive devastating hit, a big emphasis on enemy placement and level design factoring into it as well, etc. So that's the kind of thing I want to focus on as we wrap this particular video up, because as of this moment, I would say Souls-likes are a difficult market to feel like a unique experience in, which means what this game manages to do in terms of having competent combat, but also an especially interesting world to explore, is what will be the determining factor in how well a lot of this stuff pans out for them. And lucky for them, I think the overall concept of being stuck in this eternal play and a sort of stasis, and its inspiration of Italian folklore, which for me at least, is a subject I'm not overly familiar with, which makes me want to engage with the concept more. But purely in terms of this demo, I had a fair bit of fun with it, and it has accomplished the goal of what a demo is supposed to do, which has me looking forward to the game's proper release, which should be in September on the 18th specifically, if nothing gets delayed, etc. So if you liked what you saw here and you want to learn more about it, maybe subscribe and stick around and catch that review in the future. But in the meantime, do let me know what you think about this title down in the comments section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.